Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be your host today to introduce the speaker for today's colloquium, Dr. Gazali Issahaku. Dr. Issahaku holds a PhD in agricultural economics from Kiel University and is a senior lecturer at the University for Development Studies in Ghana and a senior researcher with SAF. He will present findings from his latest research on sustainable agricultural practices, farm income, and food security among rural households in Africa, recently published in the journal Environment, Development and Sustainability. Gazali, the floor is yours. You need to unmute yourself, Gazali.
Yeah, good morning or now good afternoon to everyone. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share our work with you, with Zeph. And thank you very much for the platform. This work, I initially submitted it for the presentation when it was under review, and I later had my doubt about whether I could present that after it was published, but I was given the opportunity to share it so that if possible other research loopholes could be found, and maybe we could find another avenue to do research elsewhere. So colleagues, thank you once again. This work was done in collaboration with two colleagues, Awal Abdurrahman and then Abdullah Abdul Hanan, all lecturers in the University for Development Studies. And the presentation is on sustainable agricultural practices, farm incomes, and food security in Africa. This is the outline of our presentation. We will look at the motivation for the study, the methodology employed, as well as the data and the sources, look at the results and possibly the conclusions and take home. By way of background, we all know that the urge for agriculture systems to achieve the sustainable sustainable food security in the context of growing food demands, climate change, as well as land degradation, is making it extremely necessary for us to rethink current production systems towards a more sustainable model. And such sustainable agricultural production systems is so important, especially in the context of the current food system, which plays a vital role in enhancing rural farm incomes as well as food security, especially in developing countries. And achieving such sustainable productivity or production systems in Africa is beset with numerous problems, including decreasing farm sizes as a result of increasing population pressure from especially in where land is in land constrained areas. We also have problems with soil degradation, adverse impacts of climate change, as well as the continuous mining of soils, making them poorer and poorer. There are also institutional and infrastructural bottlenecks, all lead to poor yields, lower farm incomes, and food insecurity, and worsening poverty. The consequences of current farming practices has effects on agriculture, environmental, the environment, as well as economic outcomes. On the agriculture, you can see that current production systems where we rely so much on use of chemical inputs just to mine the soils and so on, results in soil degradation, loss of insects, useful insects, especially those that support pollination and so on. And on the environment, you have biodiversity loss and extreme emissions, as well as deforestation, leading to adverse impacts on the environment. And at the economic front, you have yield gaps that result in continuous inefficient livelihoods for most smallholders. And these have to change. And there is a long list of literature on various aspects of sustainable agriculture, some dealing with minimum tillage, use of organic fertilizers, early cropping, and so on. And some studies have found them to have positive impact on yields. The adoption of these sustainable agriculture practices have also been found to have a strong correlation with household food security and poverty reduction. For these reasons, a lot of governments in developing countries, especially in Africa, as well as those of developing partners, have sought to promote sustainable agriculture practices to help sustain livelihoods, especially in rural communities, and also to save the environment. This has led to this comprehensive Africa agriculture program at the part of the Malabo Declaration at the EU summit, where African governments committed themselves to pushing the agenda for sustainable agriculture production and so on. A number of studies consider the adoption and impacts of sustainable agriculture practices, including that of Hiro and Misabal. Alicia, if I'm not able to pronounce the name very well, excuse me and pardon me. And others such as Tambo and Mockshell and a host of other works have some thing to do with some components of sustainable agriculture practices. And some have linked them to yields and farm revenues. Others talked about how they affect vulnerability to poverty and adoption rates. And some have looked at it from the aspects of how sustainable agriculture practices improve soil quality and that of sustainable production and there is impact on environmental resources. So what is unique about this study? In this study, we tried to examine the heterogeneous impacts of these sustainable agriculture practices on farm incomes and food security using unique data across a number of African countries. In all, there are about 9 countries involved and across different, running from west, east, and then some aspects of Southern Africa. And this study also differs from previous ones because the type of SAPs, sustainable agriculture practices employed, try to look at the complementarity aspects of each of these practices. So we considered intercropping, zero-tillage, residue incorporation, and animal manure use. And the outcomes of interest here, we look at farm incomes as well as food security, which we measured as self-sufficiency in staple food production. So these are variable we'll talk about it a little in the work as we progress. This study seeks to demonstrate in this study, we seek to demonstrate that comparing household surveys results between different multiple regions, Africa's multiple regions, and between different agroecological zones. Such comparisons, we believe, will have implications on agriculture policy across these agroecological zones that the data cut across. By way of conceptualizing it, we believe that land degradation and declining soil fertility will have effect on reducing on yields, farm incomes, and food security. This simple conceptualization in this simple conceptualization, we believe that adoption of SAPs will lead to a reduction in food insecurity. It will lead to improvement in household welfare, and a number of factors will affect adoption as well as also impact on these welfare outcomes, including that of institutional factor, policy variables. All these will have effect on adoption as well as household food security. Socioeconomic characteristics, or including that of cultural factors, the social networks, as well as
Gazali, are you still with us? Okay, apparently we have some minor technical difficulties. Do you hear me well, everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I was just a little worried whether it's my connection here, but apparently not. So let's just wait for Gazali to re-enter and continue his presentation.
Hi, Sach. Hi, Sach. I think Gazali is having a problem with his connectivity, so he's just trying to reconnect. So I'm just trying to give him that technical assistance. Yeah.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
hello. Hello.
Hi, Gazali.
Hello. Yes. In fact, I just had a trip in the internet, and my attention was drawn. Please,
We have a little
can I
difficulty
continue
hearing
from
you,
where
all
I
right? Can you speak up a
was?
little?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Much better, yes, thank you.
It's okay now? Is it okay now?
It's great, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So back to slide share. Please, I was just looking at the empirical specification of our model. Is it okay, Dr. Stack?
Yes, it's fine.
All right, so thank you. So we looked at farmers' decision to adopt these sustainable practices based on the assumption that these sustainable practices, their adoption of some kind of utility, and they will only adopt them if the or what the expect to get is outweighs what they do if they don't. And if we let this be an index of farmers decision to choose practice J over alternatives, then the maximum utility associated with adoption should be positive. The probability of choosing a particular indicated in this particular equation of these sustainable practices to other to outcomes of interest, and here we are talking about farm incomes and food security, which we represent by Q in this particular equation, that's equation 3. And if we were to estimate equation 3,
Gazali, I'm sorry to interrupt at this moment. Could you?
We know that. Hello. Yeah.
Gazali, hi. Maybe it helps if you stop sharing your video.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Not in the best quality. Maybe it helps if you stop sharing your video. Right.
So, is it okay now?
Yeah, a little louder if possible.
A little louder. Maybe generally the internet is just weak today. But is it okay now?
Unfortunately, not.
Dr. Stark, is the sound okay now?
It's the volume is too low.
Stark, am I clear now?
The volume is too low, Gazali.
Dr. Stark, not yet. Dr. Stark, is it clear now?
Yes, I believe you can continue, please.
The volume is too low. So the volume is too low. Abdullah, just come and assist me with the volume. Yeah. I can. Yeah. Hello, Dr. Stark. Hello, Dr. Stark.
Yes, Gazali, I believe we have some time lags in the connection here.
Dr. Stark, is it better now? Dr. Stark, is it okay now?
It is. Hello? It is better. Yes.
It's better now. Okay. So we're saying that we can link the farmer's decision to choose these sustainable agriculture practices to the outcomes we have here, and that is what we specify in equation 3, and we are trying to justify why we decided to use the multinomial endogenous treatment effects over others. We're saying that if we were to estimate this with any normal or with OLS, beta would have been the impact of adoption on the food security or farm incomes or food security. However, we're saying that the farmer's decision to choose or to adopt each of these things is not randomly assigned, and controlling for endogeneity arising from selection bias has to be accounted for, and that is why we decided to choose to use the approach by Deb and Trivedi, and that is specified in equation 4. Maybe no time, we will not have time to
We don't hear you, Gazali. I'm sorry.
But basically, these are observed, what we call the unobserved. You don't hear? Can you? Is it okay now? You hear now? Dr. Stark? Dr. Stark, is it okay now?
Yes, the volume is still very low.
Volume is still very low, but I hear you very, very clearly. I hear you very clearly, but I don't know why. I've increased the volume to the...
Maybe you can move a little towards the microphone. That might help.
The microphone.
Exactly.
The microphone.
Perfect.
Is it okay? Is it okay now?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. 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 So I think I've gotten the trick now. Yeah, so we're saying that estimating equation 3 will have issues with endogeneity and then arising from selectivity bias. So we decided to employ the multinomial treatment effects, endogenous treatment effects model by Depp and Trivedi. We're saying that the selection equation for that model is specified in equation 4, and basically the important variables here are the observed characteristics Z, as well as the this L unobserved characteristics. So which we believe, or these latent variables also influence selection. And if we were to estimate with any oil, we wouldn't have been able to observe that. So we the equation 5 is just the estimate model for that. And the impact equation is as stated in equation 6. That is how the adoption of practices influencing the outcomes, so influencing outcomes as specified in equation 6. This model, you can estimate it with or without instruments, but it's always advised that you employ instruments to improve the estimates. And we know that instrumental variables, getting the right instruments, always difficult, but we try to get these variables from both farmers' perception of farmers perceive them in terms of their effectiveness, in terms of so many characteristics will the perceived utility will influence their decision to adopt them. And that's why we added perception as a variable. Extension services provide a lot of information because some of these practices are knowledge intensive, and knowledge intensity, we believe that is likely to influence adoption rather than just the farm incomes of households and membership in farmer-based organization. Most of these farmer-based organizations intend to share a lot of information on agriculture technologies and so on. And that's why we added this to as an instrument. And we look at the data employed in the study. We mentioned earlier that this data came from the Sub-Saharan Africa Intensification of Food Crops Agriculture. We refer to it as Afrint project. And that project was between the African Swedish research, African government institutions, and then the Swedish research institution. And in all, there were about 8 to 9 institutions across a number of African countries seated in this table. And these research institutions employed different strategies or different sampling procedure, multi-stage sampling procedure. The first stage involves selection of these 9 countries based on their potential to produce this crop, maize, rice, about 2 regions from each country, about 2 to 10 communities. And the final stage involved the selection of about 300 to 400 households from each community. So in all, for this particular study, we are using almost 3,809 households across a reclassified West, East, and Southern Africa, depending on looking at the map here. So we have Ghana here. For instance, I'm in Ghana. The study sampled data from the upper east, and then that was down south. In other countries such as Nigeria, a similar approach was used. that of Ethiopia, and down up to Mozambique. So uh, these particular sustainable agriculture practices were employed or were studied in detail in this particular study, include intercropping, zero-tillage, residue, incorporation, as well as animal manure. All these aspects of sustainable agriculture practices have been studied either individually or in combination with others. But for this particular study, we try to look at them, how they influence farm revenues individually, as well as how they complement each other. So we have series of combinations of these, but we just highlighted this for this particular study. This particular presentation, but in the paper, the combination of all these practices are involved. And this is the distribution. About 16 households were not, 16% of the total sample were not practicing any of these sustainable agriculture practices. And then while about close to 7% of the total sample were implementing animal manure or whatever. The combinations we have in the table is very long. We have just decided to indicate the individual, but inside the paper we have all the combinations. We estimated for farm incomes and use it as our dependent variable, and then the self-sufficiency in food production to as our the second outcome variable of there were so many household coverage in this particular study, institutional stated here. So on this particular, let me say that in this particular model, it uses two steps. It's a two-step model. The first model estimates the multinomial logic, multinomial probit model, and then the second component looks at the what is a normal linear regression model, where it takes into consideration the unobserved characteristics. We are looking at only the impact or the component that deals with the impact of adoption, and that is why we will not be able to talk about the multinomial logic. That's the drivers of adoption of these practices, but the impact or the effect of each of these practices on the outcomes of inter-farm income, and then this self-sufficiency in food production that we constructed. For farm income, we realize that adoption of each of these practices in isolation, for instance, incorporation of organic manure that we represented here by I, Z is this a practice of zero-tillage, and then R, residue incorporation, and A, animal manure use. Each of these practices adopted individually rather appear to have a negative effect on farm incomes, as well as this self-sufficiency in staple food production. When they were combined, a few areas, they were either positive and not significant, or generally also negative in when farmers adopted two of them. The area that we have shaded, and the table is so long, it continues here. The interesting area is when farmers adopted three of such practices in combination. You see that in most of the areas, they were highly statistically significant and positive. And if we take East Africa, the adoption of, for instance, in intercropping combined with zero-tillage, combined with residue incorporation, though not positive, but in terms of self-sufficiency in food production, we had it to be positive at the 10% level. For West Africa, highly significant, and then for both outcomes. And then, however, the pool appear not to be significant. These are just interesting and funny results. But the important thing is when farmers adopted all these strategies in combination, in intercropping combined with zero-tillage, combined with residue incorporation and animal manure use in all regions, including the pool, these were found to be positive and statistically significant in terms of their effect on farm incomes and then the self-sufficiency in food production. And the second component of the model, where we look at the latent variable, the unobserved effects. The unobserved effects is also indicated in this particular part of the table. The first part of the table, effect of farmers' decision to choose any of this model and how it influences the outcomes of interest is what we are seeing in this table. So in general, the unobserved effect is rather mixed, not like the direct effects. The direct effects had a pattern, but the unobserved effects really didn't follow any specific pattern because the unobserved factors influencing the adoption of intercropping alone, for instance, on farm, the effect on farm income appeared to be positive here, and that on self-sufficient food production appeared to be negative. That for East Africa, and the similar pattern is seen throughout. So the unobserved factors influencing adoption as well as outcome didn't follow any specific pattern, unlike the direct effects of adoption. We would like to state that the estimates of the multinomial endogenous treatment effects model, the basic assumption is that selection bias from unobservables, unobserved factors are taken into consideration. But we tried estimating the multinomial multivalued treatment effects that uses an assumption of unconfoundedness from unobserved factors. So this model, the multinomial endogenous treatment effects, multivalued treatment effects using
sorry, Gazali, can you speak up a little or get closer to the microphone?
Hello, is it better now?
Yes, now it's better.
All right. We tried doing a robustness of our results with this inverse probability weighted regression with multi-value treatment effects, and we realized that. But this model, the general assumption is that unobserved factors, unconfoundedness is not a problem. So we assumed what we observed in the multinomial endogenous treatment effects in the earlier model. The results appear to follow a similar pattern here. Adoption of individual practices, whether intercropping, zero-tillage, residue incorporation, or animal manure, appear to be generally have a negative effect on either farm incomes or self-sufficiency in food production. And the combination of the two practices appear to follow a similar pattern, except in a few areas where the effect is positive and also significant, especially maybe that of East Africa, which I highlighted here. But generally, adoption of just two practices may also generally produce the negative effect, even with the multi-value treatment effects model. But the same model, we are still talking about the multi-value treatment effect that our robustness check we realized that the adoption of more than 2, that is 3 or 4, generally produce highly insignificant results or impacts on either farm incomes or self-sufficiency in food production. And this confirms what the earlier model that assumed confoundedness of unobserved factors. So generally, this particular study, we can say that may lead to, and this most of the time farmers hardly use, and that is why probably weird when initially we're thinking that some of these practices may produce negative impacts on farm incomes were irrelevant, but generally farmers appear to use a lot of practices in combination. The adoption of 3 or more significantly increase farm incomes, and we are saying the implication of these is that farmers will derive economic benefits from adoption if they are assisted, because some of these practices either could have cost implications or could also be extremely labor demanding, and farmers may need to be assisted somehow to be able to adopt them. And that some of the SAPs practices, some of these sustainable agriculture practices, if implemented individually or in isolation, may need some time to produce positive dividends. And in the short run, they may not, though we didn't factor in time as a variable, but generally the literature indicates that some of the observations that we saw having negative impacts is as a result of the fact that the results produced from this snapshot analysis may not produce positive results. So based on these insights, we can say that significant improvement in household welfare will be realized when appropriate packages of sustainable agriculture practices are combined by households. And the rural households, we realize in the analysis that most of the households in Southern Africa experience the greatest impact. The 4 were jointly adopted. Our presentation for now. Thank you very much for your attention. Dr. Stack.
Thank you very much, Dr. Issahaku, for this interesting presentation. I think we took away some key messages for food security and farm income, even though the connection was a little bit flawed. But I mean, the distance is roughly 6,000 kilometers between Bonn and Tamale. So anyways, I will share for now the link to your publication in the chat for everyone interested to look it up and cite your work. And now I'd like to open the floor for the discussion. So if you have questions, please use either your raise hand function or the chat function. And we have already one question or several questions by Alicia in the chat that are just redirect to you, Gazali. So Dr. Mirzabayev would like to have pointed out how sustainable agricultural practices adoption is expected to affect farm wage earnings and income from machinery leasing, which are included as part of the dependent variable on farm income. So Gazali, you also find the questions in the chat that I just read out loud. Furthermore, he would like to ask you to discuss more the validity of the instruments, as well as a clarification on whether including country dummies to account for country heterogeneity are included, and whether it would be good to account for broader food security, households which are not food self-sufficient and still be food secure thanks to off-farm and non-farm income.
Okay. Yeah. Let me start from. Can I start with Dr. Amisbau's question? Hello, can you hear me? Look.
Yes, sure. Just go.
Yeah. Yeah, the dependent variable farm incomes was we tried as much capture all at the farm level, including what out in terms of as well as what they really earn from production. We had really challenged constructing this variable, but at the end of the day, any income associated with the farm household from production related, we captured that as farm income, and that is why you're seeing maybe somebody renting out farm equipment as part of the farm income. And there is also this question on validity of these instruments. Yeah, we generally apply these using the falsification test to try to see whether these instruments are valid. But by economic intuition, we believe that the instruments employed in the way farmers perceive these sustainable agricultural practices will influence their adoption. This people's perception of things influence their behavior or their attitude. But we believe that this will farm incomes practices or sustainable agricultural practices will not directly influence unless they adopt it. So it can only influence through adoption. And that is why intuitively, but we also tested the validity using the falsification tests to establish their link or their strong correlation. They were strongly correlated with these outcomes jointly. Those individuals, some were quite weak. Yeah, hello. Yeah, doctor. Yeah, doctor.
Please switch off the microphone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not you, Doctor. Not you, Dr. Issahaku. That was directed towards Shaibu Melon.
Yeah. So I just tried my best to to explain Alicia's question versus that of the instrument's validity. I think there was a third one I didn't capture that well. I didn't get that well, or I've forgotten. If you could just draw my attention once again so that I take that.
Thank you, Dr. Issahaku. I have a second point raised by Alicia Misabayev and also Dario Schulz in the chat that deals with the descriptive statistics. Can you give us some information on the share of adopters that you found in your research?
The share, share of adopters. Yes, this is the raw, the individual variables. But when we this table is quite long, containing almost 16 combinations, 16 combinations of these practices. For instance, we have 4 practices: that's intercropping, zero-tillage, residue incorporation, and then the use of animal manure. This gives us 4 individual practices. But those who applied none of these practices at all in their production activities were found to be 16, almost 18, 17%. Those who use intercropping only, about almost 11%, about 15% for those practicing zero-tillage across the entire sample. And then adoption of animal manure, we had about, but I saw the use of animal manure only sometimes maybe up to Burkina Faso, and I don't know what pertains in so many other countries. Animal manure, especially cattle dung can be used as fuel for cooking. People dry them and then sometimes use them for cooking, and that may not make this particular manure available for use in farming and so on. And I think that of the dung from donkeys, the dung from cattle, and most of these large ruminants, instead of then being used for purely agricultural purposes as manure, may end up as part of household fuel, cooking fuel, and so on. So, but generally, the fuel animal manure usage was quite low across all the countries. But we had a combination of all these will give us about 16 combinations. So about 2 raised to the power 4 will give us about 16 combinations. And that is what is given us in the results table, where we have all these combinations from individual usage to whether I've been able to explain this to convince. Hello? Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
Gazali? Yes.
Yeah, I'm saying I don't know whether I've been able to convince the question about the description of this distribution of the practices.
Well, that depends on the
questioner.
On exactly.
Okay.
So,
I hope
Alicia, is your question solved in that regards?
Thank you, Gazali. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Gazali. We have two more. We have 2 more questioners in line. First,
Dr. Ali, Dr. Mizabao. Thanks.
Gazali, we have 2 more questioners at hand. First, I'd like to give the word to Shaibu Melon and then Lucas Kornhair. And as we have only 9 minutes left, please state your questions as short as possible for Gazali to have the chance to answer it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thanks for the presentation. And I have basically 2 questions, very simple one. Now, we all know that, okay, so we all know that sustainable agriculture practices have been scaled up a lot in SSE or Sub-Saharan Africa. But recent study, if you look at the works of Gila and his cohorts, have shown that adoption rate has been very, very super less, right?
Mhm.
So based on your results,
yeah,
how do we, what will be the policy in terms of its contribution to the current low adoption? Given that, the second one is that if I observe carefully, there are some combinations that I think, I don't know, but I think it's not quite feasible in some of the Sub-Saharan Africa. For example, there's always that trade-offs between the crop residue, the ability to use the crop residue to feed livestock, and also incorporate it into the soil. So I don't know how you captured or deal with that in the combination. So if you can expatiate on that, those two stuff, that'll be all.
Maybe expand. First one.
Gazali, sorry, we don't hear you at the moment. Let me first take Luca's question. Okay, Gazali apparently dropped out again. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Let's wait for him to come back to answer the questions properly. So meanwhile, while we are waiting for Gazali to return, as he is affiliated with the SAF, being a senior researcher, we are happy to have him coming to Bonn in September and October. And well, there he is again. And maybe he is willing to hold the presentation then in late September, early October again. And if we are fortunate enough, then we have the presentation in person this time. But now I'd like to give the chance to give Dr. Issahaku the microphone back. Gazali, yeah, please go on.
The internet, but back to Shaibu's concern. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, all good. Thank you.
Yeah. So we say that the low adoption rate is partly due to partly due to cost of adoption, because most of these sustainable agriculture practices, in addition to the economic benefits, we also have environmental benefits, and some of these benefits, if farmers are not really assisted to adopt these practices, the cost versus economic and environmental benefits. Environmental benefits is for everyone, but the farmers are looking at the immediate economic benefits, and some of these economic benefits may not be enough to outweigh the cost. And that is why most of them are usually linked to projects, and after the project ends, most of them also end. And in our recommendation, we stated that for farmers to benefit, they need to be really assisted. And we think that adoption of sustainable agricultural practices or the implementation should be considered as a public good, where those farmers who choose to implement them, they are implementing things for the benefit of society, not just for direct economic benefits. Though we didn't analyze environmental outcomes, but we all agree, or generally in the literature is agreed that the sustainable agriculture practice adoption has some environmental sustainability component, which is a public good that we all need to consider. So that recommendation is there, and there is this trade-off between residue use as part of sustainable and as a way of feeding livestock. Totally agree with and the situation in Ghana here, if it's applied elsewhere in Africa, most farm residues harvest everything.
Well, I believe Gazali is gone again. At this point, being already, so we already have 2:30. I would just like to wait for. There he is again. Yes, Gazali. Please. Yes, Gazali, we hear you.
Dr. Stark, decided to use Abdullah's internet app that appears to be a little bit stable now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you. I would like to ask you to
I don't know whether I don't know whether I was able to answer answer Shaibu's question, but I said Dr. Lucas appeared to also have a question.
Yes, that is true. Due to the time that we already exceeded by now 1 minute, and unfortunately, at least I was not able to catch your final remarks to Shaibu's question. Would you please repeat the final, the essence of your answer?
Final part of so the essential thing about low adoption of sustainable agriculture practices. I said that these practices, they have both economic and environmental benefits, and sometimes the benefits economically is what farmers directly are interested in. So environmental benefit, which is more of a social good or public good, probably the farmers who practice sustainable agriculture should state, since what their activities benefit society, what directly benefits farmers is the economic outcomes of them. I mentioned that with regards to crop residue being a trade-off, farmers' ability to adopt crop residue could be difficult in some countries. And I said I agree with Shaibu because a lot of farmers have
harvest everything from the fields, including the stocks, which they use as either feed for livestock or even fuel wood or firewood. For instance, somebody harvests maize, including the stalks, the dry stalks, to be used as firewood. And in that case, if you insist on sustainable agriculture using crop residue management, that may not be feasible. And if we want this particular aspect to be intensified in terms of adoption, then we need to provide alternative fuel, such as the use of LPG gas for cooking, so on, rather than using residues for production. And this will go a long way to help in the promotion of sustainable agriculture. I don't know whether I was able to mention the key things. Dr. Stark.
Thank you very much, Dr. Issahaku, for the presentation and answering the questions. I know that Lucas Corner still had one question in mind, but he does not mind to keep his question until you come in September to Bonn. And as I already mentioned to the audience, maybe we are lucky and you have the opportunity to share this interesting presentation one more time, that time then in person, if we are lucky. For now, I'd like to close this session for today and thank you once again, Dr. Gazali, and raise your attention to next week's colloquium, where we will have Edward Montantwa talking about the social media perspectives from poor rural farmers in Zimbabwe. I wish you a nice weekend and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.